What's going on, guys? It's Pete Nova from the Face Off Sports Network. I am back with my Week 10 wide receiver rankings slash tiers. Let's just jump right into it. My first tier is going to start off with Justin Jefferson as the number one wide receiver this week. He takes on Jacksonville. Then you have Jamar Chase second, takes on Baltimore. Then you have Tyreek Hill going up against the Los Angeles Rams. Amon-Ra St. Brown going up against Houston, Garrett Wilson against Arizona, and then you have Deebo Samuel, who is my sixth receiver. I do want to talk a little bit about Deebo Samuel. In this tier specifically, I think Deebo has a decent shot at finishing as wide receiver one this week. I expect it to be a high scoring game in his matchup. Hopkins just scored two touchdowns and Patrick Mahomes threw 291 yards against his Tampa Bay defense. They've not been great this season. Specifically, they're giving up the sixth most points to wide receivers on the year. In the last 4 weeks, they've tightened up a little bit. They're ranked 17th when it comes to points allowed to the position, but they gave up 20 or more fantasy points to a wide receiver in 6 of 9 weeks this season. CMC coming back also, I think, opens up this offense. It's hard to game plan for CMC and Debo. They're both like very similar in terms of like their playmaking ability. And, it's easier to neutralize one of them when Debo's on the field with no IU. But now, you have CMC coming back. Like that's going to stress the defense. And I think Debo should benefit from that. Moving on to my tier two, it's going to start off with Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp takes on the Miami Dolphins. Then you have Malik Neighbors against Carolina. Want to see how Malik Neighbors fares. I mean, this is one of those weeks it feels like where like he has to get going. This is a great matchup for him, and that offense needs to start running through him if they want to be successful, which they haven't been. You got AJ Brown, who is not questionable. It seems like he's going to play. He practiced today, and so that's a good sign. He takes on Dallas. You have Nico Collins against Detroit, who is coming back off that hamstring injury. Then you have Puka Nacua at 11, and he's taking on the Miami Dolphins, just like Cooper Kupp. Both guys in this tier. And then Zay Flowers to close out the tier two. He's my wide receiver 12 on the week. Let's talk a little bit about Nico Collins. If you're a fantasy owner and you own him, we've waited, a good amount of weeks. Last time we saw Nico Collins on the field, he looked like the best wide receiver in football. And it's not a shot at Justin Jefferson. It's not a slight at any of these guys. He was just playing the best of any wide receiver in football. He led the league in receiving yards after 2 weeks of him not even playing. I expect him to get right. It took 4 weeks off with the hamstring. As long as he doesn't re-aggravate that, I can't see how he doesn't have a smash week. He's going up against the Lions, who give up the third most points to wide receivers this season. Lions have had at least one wide receiver score 13 PPR points in every single game. There's never been a receiver that scored lower than that. Last week, they gave up 30 points in PPR to wide receivers. And the week before that, they gave up 38 to wide receivers. So I expect Nico Collins to have a great week and pick up where he left off. I do worry a little bit about the pressure on that offensive line. We saw it with the Jets, and they did just bring in Zadarius Smith for the Lions, who that pass rush has been lacking, but I still expect them to run this offense through Nico Collins and Joe Mixon. And I'm expecting a really good week. And the week is finally here. If you waited on Nico Collins, he's back, and get him in your lineups, of course. I'm sure you're not benching him. My tier three is going to start with Brian Thomas Jr. Brian Thomas Jr. takes on Minnesota. Then you have Drake London at 14 taking on the Saints. Devontae Adams at 15 taking on Arizona. Terry McLaurin at 16 taking on Pittsburgh. George Pickens taking on Washington at 17. And then CeeDee Lamb with the, Cooper Rush against Philadelphia. When looking at this tier, Brian Thomas at 13 could easily have been put into the tier one. I mean, the tier two. It was very hard picking between him and Zay Flowers and Puka for those last two spots in tier two. But, Brian Thomas Jr. has done a lot with a little. He hasn't been getting this huge volume of passes, but he goes up against Minnesota, who's 32nd when it comes to points given up to wide receivers. They give up the most in the NFL. They've given up 196 receiving yards to wide receivers per game. I mean, that is absolutely absurd. That's not even counting running backs or tight ends. And Minnesota can be, beaten deep. BTJ has made hay and has been successful with, catching these deep balls down the field and stretching defenses. And I expect that to continue. No Christian Kirk. I think Gabe Davis might be back, so that might actually open things up a little bit more. But he's got a 21% target share in the year. That's solid. And volume should go up more than normal, I expect, in this game. They could be chasing points against this Minnesota team who has a good offense, and Jacksonville's defense is not very good. So I expect them to be throwing the football, and I expect Brian Thomas to have a really nice week. Going into our last tier four, I mean, you have Devonta Smith here, who, it's weird when AJ Brown's not on the field. Devonta Smith seems to take the bull by the horns and have a really good fantasy outing. AJ Brown looks like he's back. He takes on Dallas. Then you have Khalil Shakir as wide receiver 20, Darnell Mooney as wide receiver 21, going up against the Saints. Shakir goes up against Indy. Lad McConkey at wide receiver 22, going up against Tennessee. Josh Downs against Buffalo at wide receiver 23, and DeAndre Hopkins here at wide receiver 24. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins should be viewed as a low to mid wide receiver too, and he's got upside. I mean, we might see this relationship grow with him and Patrick Mahomes. Let's talk a little bit about Khalil Shakir. Possibly no Keon Coleman, possibly no Amari Cooper, and the Colts give up the ninth most points to wide receivers in the NFL. Colts gave up 36 points to wide receivers last week. They gave up 20 to Justin Jefferson and 16 to Jordan Addison. And they've Khalil Shakir's had back-to-back weeks with 29% target share or higher. So if Coleman or Cooper can't go, this is a great matchup, and that connection with Josh Allen's been there all season. So I love this spot for Khalil Shakir. If you're somebody who bets, I'll probably possibly be laddering his receiver yards. But that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you for tuning in. We will be here live this week to answer your start sit questions and anything else. Hit me up on Twitter if you have any questions, or drop your questions in the video below. But I'll see you guys next time.